We'll get YouTube stirred up and pull these people into the waiting room.
Any preference, open, close?
Your call.
All right, we'll go ahead and start the meeting for the Board of Selectmen.
Are we on it?
Last people are just joining in from Zoom now. They don't have audio yet.
That's all right, we can start.
Should be good to go then.
All right, go ahead.
Good evening. It is the 2nd of March, 2022, opening for the Board of Selectmen. Myself, for Selectman Tara Carr, Selectman Steve Dunn, and Selectman Harry Shaker are present this evening.
Glenn Rooney will open up the Board of Finance meeting for Wednesday, March 2nd as well. President is Dan DeVorst and Mary Capiello. Glenn Rooney, Brianna is on via Zoom along with Eileen, and we expect Ryan later. Congratulations.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I think we're ready for you.
Are you ready for us?
Sure.
Okay. Well, as you know, the purpose of this meeting is to present the findings of the budget from the Board of Selectmen to the Board of Finance. I think Marcia's working the slides from home.
Yes, Marcia's on from home.
Next slide, please. Just before I get into the goals, which you all have already seen in both of my letters, I just wanted to say that I can't believe it's March already. You know, it's 3 months have flown by, and back in January when I started looking at the budget, I felt like this night would never come, but here it is. And we've spent a lot of time as a town hall, myself with departments, with our amazing controller, Marcia, and getting ready for the deliberations with the Board of Selectmen. And since 10 February, that was my first budget meeting with the Board of Selectmen. We've been working diligently up until this past Monday, the 28th of February. We've spent many long hours, and we've put a lot of hard work, and you know, we've gone over every single item ad nauseum. We've looked very closely at this budget, and as some of you already know, because you've been on the Board of Finance for a long time, it's not something to take lightly. We've definitely done our due diligence as far as scrutinizing every single item, even down to the dollar amount on some items. I think collectively, I do believe that the Board of Selectmen and I came up with a very responsible and reasonable budget that we'll be presenting to you this evening, and that you saw earlier in my email from this morning. So just to reiterate the goals that I had proposed, what it boils down to is quality services that are efficient and effective to our citizens in town, to provide an excellent education to Brookfield students for today and tomorrow, to properly maintain our capital assets, to maximize their value and longevity, to continue to reduce our dependence on debt, to continue refining and reviewing long-term plans for stability, and then, of course, to live within our means through this, what I'm calling an era of fiscal frugality. Next slide. Next. So this should come as no surprise. You saw it earlier today, and it should also look pretty familiar because the bottom line is the same from what I originally proposed. We're looking at a 3.15% tax increase and a 25.88 mill rate. As far as revenues, there's no changes to how the revenues have been determined. For taxes, prior year supplemental interest on taxes, licenses and permits, charges for services, they're all based on the 5-year averages. And then for investment earnings, it's based on interest rate. For the two revenues, other and other financing sources, Marcia will address this in her section. slide. For expenditures, you can see back on the front page, we have a 2.60% increase in town ops, a 3.61% increase in education ops, and a 7.51 increase in debt service. This is due to the second bonding on the Candlewood Lake Elementary School. And then there was a 0.22% decrease in capital spending from taxes, which will also be discussed, touched on later on. So thanks to Marcia for putting this graphic together. I really like this. It does a great job of depicting our biggest increase, which jumps out aside from town government, is our public safety. And that's directly related to the fact that we're just seeing increasing demands on police, fire, and EMS across the board, which I think you guys already understand. And then as far as police, what it narrows down to is a slight increase in salaries for the top leadership and rank and file, with the addition of in-car cameras. For EMS, it's an additional shift. And then we have fire marshal overtime and some new software. So in that area of public safety, it totals $332,375, and that's a 64.04% increase. And then right on down the line, you can, back to the slide, thanks. You can see public works, and then next on the list is culture and recreation, and then lastly, health and welfare. So for public works, the increase primarily is because of fuel, increasing fuel costs, which we all experience at the pump. And then I just wanted to touch on the recycling. There's a decrease there, potentially looking at reducing our participation in the Brookfield Hazardous Waste Day. From what I understand, all residents can go to any of our surrounding towns and participate in the same event at no cost. However, to them, but for us, there would be some kind of a calculation that's based on cars, and then the percentages based on the waste, which I have to get a better understanding of from HRRA. My last meeting with her ended up getting canceled. And then as well as dropping the fees from New Milford from previous participation in their program. For utilities on public works, the Candlewood Lake water line, Greg Dombowski's been working on an agreement with Aquarian, so that's where that's coming from. And then finally, for culture and recreation, we have an increased salary at the library, and then some additional happenings with grounds. Next slide. On expenditures, we have the Board of Ed. There's a 3.8% request that was original, and there's certain drivers there. You can see them listed. There's some things that are contractual, and then of course the inflationary costs. The Board of Ed is proposing adding a bilingual teacher. That's required legislation. There's a slight increase in enrollment, and as far as the phase-in, that will include a social studies coach / technician, and then 0.31% for strategic investments. The addition for the Board of Ed health insurance was $208,000. And then in order to bring the mill rate down and balance the budget, we cut $300K. So after all is said and done, it's a 3.61% proposed increase by the Board of Selectmen. Next slide. This is what an overview of our debt service looks like. And as the years move out to 2025, you can see we're going to be paying on both interest and principal. Over to capital. So the big one here, that jumps out, obviously, is the townwide emergency radio system. I've been working on trying to determine, what the difference is between keeping it local, which we've all been briefed on, the P25 system in a joint session, versus having it, state-run, which I'm looking into, currently. So this chart just depicts all of the projects in one place. And then if we move to the next slide, you can see how ARPA is incorporated overall. Sorry to have you jump back and forth, Marcia, but on the previous slide, there's some ARPA items listed. And then the next slide is a compilation of everything that the Board of Selectmen discussed for ARPA. And I wanted to bring your attention real quick, if I can find it. I forgot to pull this out. Several weeks ago, this was provided to us, and what the Board of Selectmen did was just go item by item and really try to determine exactly how we as a board wanted to work through these proposals from ARPA. And again, I want to reiterate the fact that the committee did a tremendous job. Their rankings were phenomenal on how they measured everything and really did their due diligence as far as providing this to us as a starting point. And then the decisions we made jointly were driven by needs of the community, which was the original intent of the ARPA, and some of the things I mentioned earlier, such as EMS and town needs coming out of COVID. So you'll see things like first recommendation from the committee that we adopted was the Brookfield Fire Department as an example. We could spend several hours talking just about ARPA, so I'm going to move along to some of the things we've identified as what we're calling hardships this year. And there's a little bit going on as far as just reevaluation, Brookfield's debt, some of the projects we have, some of our needs, just things that cost a tremendous amount of money, and with inflation and supply and demand, there's a lot, increasing prices. So these slides are just to kind of lay out some of the things that we determined were, hardships, but just things that make this time a little bit trickier than maybe years past. But so on the reevaluation, our tax base increased by 20.18%, and then the mill rate can be reduced by a corresponding amount. It's important to keep in mind that not all the properties changed by the same percentage. The overall average increase on real estate is 20%. Some properties increased in value significantly more. For example, if you had a lake view or water access or waterfront, then you could have been, your value could have gone up an average of 37%. And obviously these homes and properties will absorb more of the tax burden. And then on the contrary, some values really decreased, or didn't decrease, but they increased much less, I should say. So this year in our revaluation, commercial properties only increased 8%. So in previous revaluations, it's been opposite, where the commercial has absorbed more of the tax burden, whereas this year they're absorbing less. And then an interesting factor is car values, which have also increased 12 to 16%. And again, I think this is attributed to supply chain issues and just what's unraveled coming through COVID. Next slide. For education, we're continuing to move our schools forward, which is great. Some of the children have additional academic and mental health needs from the pandemic. What does that mean? I spoke with Dr. Burrell earlier, and there's an ARP ESSER that's going to be covering some of their needs pertaining to academic and mental health issues, such as social work, summer school, interventionists, things of that sort. And then, as you probably know better than I do, there's a great deal of maintenance needs at the school. Some of the things we're currently looking at are major roof issues at several points across the high school. The boys' locker room is still outstanding, the HVAC system, and all these things are being worked and addressed, and they're in the pipeline. It's just a matter of getting after them and trying to figure out affordability and if there's something we want to actually execute on, just based on some of the high inflation and other factors. With skinnier walls, another example, the 3 walls, I should say. And then grounds, just some different areas there that we'll get into more detail on as the days progress and we start working with departments through the Board of Finance. Next slide. So you all knew the debt bubble was coming, clairvoyant, and while we still haven't finished paying off the debt on the high school, we are now incurring this huge debt for the new school. I think we're the 4th highest debt in the state of Connecticut. And again, Marcia has come up with some really incredible strategic options for us, so she'll touch on that here in a minute. So I want to commend the departments. They really did a great job of trying to keep their budgets as flat as possible. Before I started looking at everything, and they came to me, and then I brought it to the Board of Selectmen. But there's been other challenges, and again, a lot of it's related to just prices going up. We saw that with our software, our fuel, and then again, supply chain issues. Things like obtaining contractors and then getting pricing and having them actually commit to the work and do it at a fair cost are hard to do. And then with vehicle availability, we all know it's not a great time to necessarily be buying a car. And everything just seems to be more and more expensive. So I'd like to ask that we keep all questions and discussion to the very end. And then I'm going to turn it over to Marcia to touch on those strategic options that she came up with. Over to you, Marcia.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay.
We can.
So the budget includes some strategic decisions, and these are subjective decisions. So we wanted to bring each one of them out to show why they were made and the thinking behind them, so that you know what the board was thinking and decide if you agree or disagree. But one of the first ones that we've talked about, the debt bubble, and this was the overall sketch that we made a year or two ago, and that we were going to use these one-time revenues to offset that. And instead of our mill rate just going way up and then being able to come down only regarding the debt, not regarding other things, it was trying to even out the mill rate. And again, that you projected that this coming back in 2018, so we could be prepared, which is commendable. This budget, we have a worksheet that we used. The primary purpose of the worksheet was to look at the one-time revenues that the graph just kind of gave them in big chunks, And this is showing the one-time revenues allocated one at a time, that and trying to use them in order of the expirations. That the premiums we had to use first. So we used 1.6 million in a one-time premium last year. That this year, this budget, the proposed budget, uses 1.5 million in a premium and a little bit of the ARPA money. That the rest of the ARPA money we had talked about using 1.9 million would then go to next year. There's a line here as we experimented, should there be more ARPA money used to balance the operating budget or not. This budget does not have any more in it. We've got some available fund balance in the cash for capital account that is called the capital non-recurring fund. And that is projected to be used in these 2 years. And then the general fund that using the fund balance policy that we take half of any annual surplus and put it aside and available to be appropriated. And that's how we're growing our fund balance up to the amounts in the policy. That's this amount, and that would be over 2 years. This year we look to say that there in these 4 years that we would need to accumulate $350,000 more for this to balance. That is not in there now, but that would be underspending or excess revenues. So that is how that worked out. And it was a helpful model for the purpose it wasn't to us, for the purpose that it was intended, which was just to see if we use too much revenue in this year, then next year's mill rate will jump up more than it should. So it kind of has to balance across all 4 years. So just trying to look at the strategic decision that, the best course of action is, I think what you've been doing is you saw the debt bubble coming, that you've prepared with one-time revenues to one-time expenditures or expenditures that won't be continuing the high school debt, and projecting multiple years ahead. And so this one uses the best course of action that had you not done that, we would not have seen it coming. We wouldn't have been prepared. And it would have been a nightmare. Another strategic decision that is different this year is other revenues. Every year we have additional revenues, and we Kerma has a dividend. It's not promised every year. We've had some big controlling interest taxes. That's like a conveyance tax for partnerships, real estate partnerships. We've had FEMA money that we don't really budget for because there's some expenses that are included with it. We don't know if it's not guaranteed, that we don't know what they're going to disallow. And we've had other grants and revenues. So we've had them in the past, not just in this miscellaneous account, but in other accounts. And so in order to get a more realistic view of what might be coming in, we put $100,000 in the miscellaneous account. Again, it may come from other accounts, but we had to account for it someplace. So we don't want to be over conservative on the budget and only put in the revenues we're sure about. That we've done this once before, and when COVID hit, we put 190,000 in that we thought would come from someplace, and it did. So we want to make sure that we're trying to get just the right amount of revenues, and so the amount is $100,000, you may decide that you want higher or lower or not at all, but that is in there and we should call your attention to it. So those are the two revenue things we talked about. Opeb is a topic that we want to talk about. So what Opeb is paying in retirees' health insurance for the grandfathered employees. If you were hired before 2010 or 2017, anytime in there, depending on the bargaining unit, the town is paying your health insurance when you retire. And that's a real liability that people that were hired after that do not get their health insurance paid or a portion of their health insurance paid when they retire. But there's two parts of the Opeb liability. One is that which I'll call the real liability, and one is this implicit rate subsidy. And the implicit rate subsidy is money that is when we have retirees on our health insurance. And so let's say we have all the grandfathered employees are gone, that and we have no one else that we're going to pay health insurance for, we're still going to have a liability. And that's just the stupidest rule in accounting. But let's talk about what that is. So here, I know from looking at you guys that you understand that, that you understand that when you're younger, your health costs are lower. That Bailey. As you get older, that it costs more, that your prescriptions and doctor's appointments. And so that's the line of the health insurance. I'm sorry, the prime delivery guy just got here. That's the line for the health insurance, the actual costs. And the premium is flat across the board. Well, even when no employees are on our health insurance, the state requires us to have the retired teachers on our health insurance. And so this might be the retired teachers over here. And you can see that by having them on our health insurance, this pulls our premium up. So we're kind of getting screwed for the younger people, that it skews the premium. And so that's calculated by the actuary, and it's called the implicit rate subsidy. Implicit because you don't see it. And we don't intend to fund the implicit rate subsidy. So we want to make sure that we divide that out, that we look at the rating agency, what if we didn't pay into Opeb? What would the rating agency say? Well, the rating agency report from last time said we do not view and we didn't fund it when we got this report, and we told them that. We do not view pension and other post-employment benefits as an immediate credit risk for Brookfield. And on the same page, it talks about we've revised our view of Brookfield's debt and contingent liability profile. This is the bonded debt, not the Opeb debt. It's a separate section. To weak from strong due to this issuance. That was the second tranche of the school, leading to deteriorating overall debt metrics, which we anticipated during our last review, given the debt plans. So that they're worried about our debt. It's affected our bonded debt, and they're not seeing this as an immediate risk. So for that reason, that we were prioritizing not taking out more debt over funding Opeb. So that is part of this, that we do actually fund. If we're talking about contributions to Opeb, there's two types of contributions. Sometimes we were paying $200,000 extra in a year. to fund the future liability. That 200,000 was based on a 2015 policy that said it would increase by 200,000 a year. And I think last year, the year before, we were supposed to be funding over $1 million. However, in July of 2018, the Board of Finance changed that policy to say we would look at it year by year. That was before I came. But we're also paying almost $400,000 a year as a contribution. And you can see this is part of the financial statements from last year. We didn't make the extra, but we did make this $400,000. And what that is when we pay the premiums for the retirees. And that is in the budget, in the operating budget under health insurance, that includes current and retirees health insurance. So that's how we are paying a contribution, just not an extra contribution. If we look at our liability, 10 years ago, our Opeb liability was 34 million. It's down to 10 million. And the reason it's going down is because we've stopped new people from going in. So it's dwindling the people that are in it. Sadly, some of the people that are in it have been dying. So we went down just in the years on this graph from $20 million down to a little over $10 million. So this is a fire that's going to burn itself out, whether we pay an extra amount or not. That if we look at the area graph, this is the total liability, again, going down. And it's kind of in 2 years because we do a revaluation of this, an actuarial valuation every 2 years. So that's why it's kind of grouped together here. The yellow part is $7.3 million. And the last time we asked them to estimate what our implicit rate subsidy was, it was $7.3 million. So this difference is about $3 million of what we intend to fund. What we've been funding is the red is the amount we're paying in health insurance. And then what the extra funding we did for a few years is the black. And so it's a very small bite that it's taking out of that. But again, that's going down. It's going down naturally. So when we look at the strategic decision, the best course of action would be to say, hey, we want to fund what the actuaries say we should fund. That's what we do for the pension. Had we done that, it would be $1.2 million. The worst case is that we not only don't fund it, but we use some of the trust to pay the premiums. And so we've been working on a compromise position that with 200,000, or last year I think it was 150,000. This budget funds zero. But those are the reasons why we're funding zero. And if we were to change and talk about funding something, I would like us to talk about funding our firemen's pension. Our firemen's pension is growing, that where Opeb is going down, the firemen's pension is growing. And we first started reporting that in 2018's financial statements. It was a little under $2 million. It's now almost 3 million. So at some time this year or next year, that it's called the LOSAP pension will be probably higher than the OPEB liability. So if we were going to make a new policy on funding OPEB, I think that we would want to make it and consider OPEB and the firefighters' pension as well. The Board of Ed budget that they presented a Board of Ed budget of $48 million that health insurance numbers are just not even out yet. But at first we were told, oh no, they're going way down, or they're not going to be as high. Well, apparently when they said high, they meant 12%. So now they're estimating maybe 8%. We won't find out for another month or two. So this is what the Board of Ed approved budget was. This is the health insurance. So we use this as a base, calling this the 100% funded. For Selectmen's budget cut 300,000 from it. So they'd be 99.38% funded. And one of the things that we could look at, if we don't use the contingency, should we offset some of that cut in a strategic manner? We did it a few years ago. They called them spend aheads or prepaid expenses. That should we take, if we have it, and if everyone agrees, should we take some of that for spend aheads? If we did that, they would still be 99.7% funded. So the Board of Ed, certainly the best course is 100%. The worst case is the MBR. And so it was the compromise position to cut some from the Board of Ed. Contingency that this is another strategic decision that the fund balance policy says we start with 0.5% of the budget, and that's where the department submitted budget would show 0.5%. This was cut to an equal amount of last year's final budget, so it was cut, I think, $71,000. And some of the things we may want to talk about is, what if there's contingency left over? What would be a proactive use of that? And we could do nothing, and then it would roll into fund balance and cover some of that $350,000 that we were looking at. Half of it would roll into the fund balance that we've disciplined ourselves that we would touch. We could transfer it to capital non-recurring to cover the future debt bubble. That might be 100%. That was, I think, the Ricky idea we called a few years ago. We could transfer it to other needs that were cut in the budget, transfer to new needs that arose during the year, or maybe that's when we say, okay, we have contingency left. Now let's talk about funding Opeb or the firefighters LoSAP. So the worst case is certainly eliminating the contingency. The best case is funding 100% of the contingency. And this includes, this budget includes a compromise of not quite 100%, and a discussion of where should we, what should we do if there was money left over, either in 22 or 23. Expenditures, cash for capital, that we maintained at least a similar level to the prior year, not exact because it's made up of a lot of different things. But the actual spending was increased significantly because of other sources. One of the sources is ARPA, that one of the sources is the open space grant. There's anything that we could capture that people were asking for a capital expenditure, we tried to put on the capital budget this year. That some, they don't know if they can wait till next year, but we need to include them all in one spot so that we all have it, they all have a share opportunity. We'll talk about that. A grant, a police grant to pay for their instructional stuff. The outside service fund, if they approve it, and the asset forfeiture fund to pay for a vehicle for the police. EMS didn't spend because they had so much that we got back for them in FEMA. They didn't spend all their surplus last year, so they're paying for 2 of the items this year. The LOTSIP grant for phase 6, and FEMA that Ralph was concerned, the public works director was concerned and said, you know, we're getting this FEMA money, and no one's really connecting it that the money is for wear and tear on our vehicles and our equipment, and to try and address his concern that if we take some of the FEMA money that we get, and we've got some out there that we're waiting for. We've got applications that we're working on. We have a storm that was just declared. Take 80,000 of that, the first 80,000 that comes in, and apply it to some equipment to fund parks, public works. So those were the other sources that came in. That the worst case would be if we dropped funding, that we've committed to, the Board of Finance committed that we want to keep increasing this funding, that are increasing what we're spending. The best case is, to get ourselves caught up on the accrued maintenance and fund the current maintenance. It's going to take time. So we're at the compromise position there. All right, so capital reserves. The capital reserves are money we set aside each year to smooth out the costs over time, and so we don't incur as much debt on future purchases. And to try and give an example of this, let's say that it's our personal budget and we buy a new car every 5 years. And so we put aside $10,000 a year for 5 years. I'm sure we've all thought about this, and we thought it was great. And probably a lot of us don't do it. But this, in a perfect world, we put away $10,000 a year, and we buy the car in the fifth year for $50,000. So what if something happens in year 2? You lose your job, or in our case, that we have a debt bubble. What if something happens? Do we put the $10,000 aside by taking out a mortgage and increasing other debt? Or do we say, oh, we're not going to be able to put it aside. We're going to have to, kick the can, essentially, as we do for a lot of purchases. And so the thought was that it doesn't make sense to take out more debt. And as you play with the budget, you kind of see it. Oh, to fit in this reserve, we would have to take out more debt over here and bond more things, and so that's where we were thinking on the capital reserves that oops, I forgot to fill this in, but the requests for capital reserves were over $1.8 million. That capital was cut to just the essential items. No additional funding for reserves was put in there. However, because it would add debt. However, no reserves were used. So we've got an ambulance and we've got a fire truck in the budget. And normally we would have used the 175 and the 75. We did for about 250 of the reserves. So instead of funding 250 and then using 250, because that's about what we would have funded for those, last year it was 225, but instead of funding them and using them, we just didn't use them. And the reason for that, the reason it went this way is because if we use we're trying to use the money that's got a restriction on it first. And the ARPA money, the first selectman and the board wanted to use towards the emergency services, trying to keep that in check with the goals of the ARPA program. So if we use this, that was less that we would use on that one. This will stay around. It's got no deadline. But that was the thinking on not using the reserves, that not funding the reserves, but not using the reserves. For these purposes, it would essentially be a wash, the ones we normally do. For the additional ones that were requested, the reserve is really for a field that we would do next year. That's where the big jump came in for that we had never done reserves before. So it would be half of the cost for next year. So the best case is, of course, is that we always use reserves for all large purposes, all large purchases. The worst case is that we don't fund them and we use what we've got in there. So the compromise is we didn't touch what's in there, and we use ARPA because of the time restrictions on that. Capital bonding that Steve really was pushing to increase the amount that every year that there would be a higher threshold for what was paid in cash, that it went, or the last 2 years, it went from 50,000 to 75,000. And this year it goes to 100,000. That just minimizing the new bonding that, talking about being strategic in the timing of the bonding, that as you know, it used to be every year in November, we would take out bond anticipation notes. And we're no longer taking out bond anticipation notes, that we can thank our increasing fund balance for the cash flow to do that. And just looking to be strategic in the timing of the bonding, not only not using bond anticipation notes, but also if the elementary school that's been bonded is under budget, that would we know that by December of next year? Could we say, well, we have approved 8 million for bonding, but we have 1 million that we won't need there, so we're only going to bond 7 million. That the town radios, we don't have a precise figure for that. The consultant gave a $500,000 range, that and they're as the gross, and there could be discounts and things. So wait until we have a more precise figure. We'd have to project the cash flows to determine how long we could wait, how much of these things we could buy, maybe not spending all the money starting in July, and working with the departments to say, hey, your $400,000 truck is approved, but you're going to have to wait until the spring. And then factor that with the probability that the interest rates are going to increase several times during the year. So the strategic decisions that, the best course is we want to get to the point where we're only bonding for multi-million-dollar projects. The worst case is that we bond for what are being called nice to haves. And so instead we're bonding for just the essentials over $100,000. All right, that is it. Want me to keep this on? Do you want to go back to any slides?
Oh, no. All right. Thank you. Let's go back to slide 1 and roll right through it, because I'm sort of confused. Go ahead.
Let me just go this way. All right.
Let's go down to, keep going. Oh, no, that's a good page to start at. Let's start right there. All right. I just want to get some insight into the thought process of this budget. As late as January, the spotlight said we were looking for a 0% increase that came out. Now we're looking at a 3.5, and I'm trying to understand what's happened since the end of January to now to get us to a 3.15. You used the word clairvoyant, which really busted me. I have to be honest with you. There was nothing clairvoyant about how we look at things. This is what we know. This is what we've been preaching. It's not clairvoyant to see something that you would have known. This is a known.
Predicted the debt bubble, so.
It wasn't a
No, I
prediction, we knew it, though.
saw it coming. No,
Right.
no, I was giving.
But the clairvoyant definition is a godly sense of knowing. This is a known. We talked about this debt
Right, you
bubble.
guys did a great
We
job
preached
with
about this.
anticipating it.
So how did you get from 0 to 3.15? And then I have 100 other questions, but what was your mindset to get to there? What happened between the end of January and now to get us to 3.15?
So at that time, when the first spotlight came out, I'd been in office 3 weeks, and knowing the budget was coming, I was looking at exactly what some of the things I talked about, trying to keep the department flat with a 0% increase. And that's where I was coming from with that. Unfortunately, with everything that I talked about, with inflation and operating within constraints of just fiscal issues that we have across the board, it wasn't possible. And I think we started at over 6, so
Okay.
we were able to work it down.
All right, let's go on, and I'll let you guys go. Let's go through. Go ahead.
Can I just make one comment? I think part of our reasoning as well was we could have tried to go down to a 2 or 2.1, but we were trying, once we got into all our needs, and once we got into the actuals as to the increases in fuel and other things,
Right.
we felt it more prudent to, yes, this is a lot higher than we wanted, but we also wanted to be fair and not put ourselves
Totally agree.
into trouble
Harry,
future years.
totally agree, but this is what this group was preaching back in October.
Okay.
This is what we were preaching in October, that we got to be careful of the wording we use when we present this to the town. I believe we've had the conversation numerous times that we can't be looking at 0. This is a more realistic budget. I agree. I think what you have here is realistic. I think that there are things missing that we're going to go through that I think, and that's just me personally, but this is part of that communication thing that we talked about of, man, you can't say 0, and here we are, 3.15. This is more the number I expected. I'll be really honest with you. 3.5 to 4 is where I really thought we would get. And that's where, and again, when you use the word clairvoyant, you got me, because it's like, this was what we thought it would be. This wasn't like this group doesn't put a finger in the air and pick a number. We study these numbers, so we look at
No,
these
you
things.
guys did a great job.
So, all right, let's go through then. Go ahead, Marcia.
So how are we asking general questions? or
Let me
going
go
line by
through
line?
this, and then we'll go back through generals, because there was a few points I wanted to hit on before I forget them. How's
Okay,
that?
that's fine, 'cause I got
I know.
a couple pages
I apologize.
myself.
Go back up one. All right. On the, where was I on this one? I knew I wanted to talk about this. That's why I thought I was gonna lose my train of thought.
Sorry about that.
All right, go down. There was one I wanted to ask about that. Go ahead, keep going. Let's go through these quick. That one I get. Right here, back up one. Right there on the, now you brought up here the salary of the library. We also have the police salary wasn't broken out. There's a big police salary move in here.
It's $14,000.
Where do we get these numbers from?
When you look at the captain, the major, and the chief's position
Mhm.
against towns in our COG and across the state, and you do a comparison through CCM, which we've done a poll on, and but bringing it back to Brookfield, we have a problem now that we have a vacancy in the captain's position.
Yes, totally get that.
And we
Yep.
have 7 sergeants who I believe would potentially be eligible to be promoted to the captain's position, but it becomes unattractive for them because they're already making in
Right.
excess of that amount. And in order to keep people, qualified people interested for that position of captain, you have to make it commensurate with what's happening in the rank and file system.
Correct. But do you have the data to back that up? Because
I do have some numbers that.
because I went through every town. I got 7 towns worth of data, and I'll be honest, with you, our salary scale on every position, we're above average. On every position in the whole town hall area, we're above average. Some to the point of it's really, I mean, crazy to the numbers. So I'm just saying, when we make these decisions, we should have all the data to back it up. I mean, because when I break out the Excel sheet that I put together today, and,
So again, bringing it back to Brookfield, I do have the salaries of every employee in town, obviously, so I'm
Right.
able to look at that.
I have every town in the area. I have 7 towns worth of
I
salaries.
probably have a very similar.
So, I'm just curious, like I say, when we do these things, and you highlighted the library, but with the police, I understand the position opening, but we need to make sure, because the salaries are getting away from us.
Yeah.
We're promoting that we're underpaid, and if you really look at it, we are paying more than Newtown, and Newtown is a lot of the size bigger than we are. And we gotta be careful with these things.
I don't remember if Newtown has a captain or not. That's another problem.
Right, no, absolutely right.
Don't
On that
have a
point,
captain.
you're absolutely correct, because a lot of towns have just a chief,
Yeah.
they don't have a captain, but they have an assistant, and, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. So I'm just,
You know, Steve and I, we talked about this at length, and he agreed that it's time, and he said it was something that was actually should have happened years ago. So this wasn't something that I conjured up on my own. Again, we looked at it and we deliberated over it.
oh, this is an argument Steve and I have had every year, so you're not like, this isn't, we had the same thing last year, and we brought it down. So if you have the data, I'm on board. I mean, if the data's there, we can support this.
Yeah, I'm not saying that something needs to be decided on, like, obviously we need
No.
to scrutinize it.
The data's there, we're on board. I mean, I just need it.
I just want to make a comment. I am in full support of this budget. I was not in support of the increases in the 3 salaries, not based on performance or anything other than the fact that we have been trying, and last year we were trying to keep people at the employees at the given rate increase, 2.25. I'm sure there are many or some department heads who have other towns where other people are making more than them. There's where they're making less than them. And so I just felt that we should stay to what we were talking about, the 2.25, which is going to be the standard. And so that's why, and not that, I'm not saying we don't need a captain or we shouldn't have a captain. I would just like to make sure that, yes, we do need that. We do need that position. And again, this is not a site, I'm not just trying to cut a position. I just want to make sure that it's a position that we need. And if so, then fine, let's keep it. But that was why I was not in favor of this.
Right. So that's the same stance you took last year. You're
Right.
true to form.
Right.
This is exactly where you stood last year, and that's what we went with, was what you projected out for us. So yes. Okay, let's roll through a few more, and then I'm going to hand off the baton. All right, right here, we'll go back up. One more back. I'm trying to understand, no, go to education, Marcia. On this slide, I'm trying to understand the word, what balance the budget means. I don't understand the word balance the budget, as in, where did the $300,000 cut come based on balancing the budget?
And are we gonna, that's not, that 300 isn't in the numbers that we
Yes,
have.
it is.
It is? Oh, I didn't.
It's been added in, and I have another slide that
Okay,
I did
fine.
a study on. It's added in, and it nets out, 208 adds into the net out of 91
All right,
deduction.
yeah, for sure. Okay.
So I have that.
Okay.
I mean, when we go to what I have.
Okay, cool.
But I don't understand what that means. I'm trying to,
I'd have to, Marcia, is this one of the ones that we played around with in the model where we were moving the numbers to make sure that the rate of increase wouldn't go up excessively for years to follow?
Yes, it is.
I'm just, okay. So, would you mind going, or do you have that handy? So I think she touched on one of her later slides, the chart where she was talking about, depending on where we're spending our money. Yeah, so this one isn't live or active, but, we were looking for room to be able to balance, and she can do a much better job of explaining this than I can, but so that for out years, it wouldn't drive our tax rate out of control, to keep it balanced. So we were looking for an area to be able to have the funds to balance it back to making it not only acceptable or reasonable for this year, but for 23, 24, and beyond. Does that make sense? And when it's live and you can like play around with the numbers in there, you can see how it changes, and she has a line on the bottom that tallies like the percent increases.
Yeah, but I'm lost on this. This is the ARPA lost revenue available fund in CNR. Where you balance this?
I'm just talking, I'm not saying look at those numbers, I'm just
Okay.
saying that's the model, and this is what I thought Dan had been looking for in one of his previous emails requesting the,
No, it was a 10-year model he had requested, because we had a 10-year model that brought in all of the capital projects, all of the buildings and everything else, and we rolled through the percentage increases, which then rolled through the debt process, which gave us, if we increased by 3%, we're looking at a 5% increase because of the debt, and it rolled through all the 10 years. And it involved, the model involved the police station, the library. It brought in all of the capital projects and thought process. I think Marcia's model more here was the knock-on effect of what we do with an increase.
Right.
But I'm sort of, like I say, I'm still lost on the $300,000 removal for balancing of the budget, because I don't get what the balance number is. You came out of the 3.61, 3.15, I mean, right? The Board of Ed came in at 3.61. You came in at 3.15.
they came in at 3.8.
Yeah, but what number were you trying to balance to? What was the balance to number, I guess, to get to that?
Yeah, I guess that's probably not the best choice of words as far as, I don't even really know what balancing a budget like this means.
I'll be honest with you, I got lost too. I mean, I don't understand what it was.
I asked Marcia about that earlier as well.
Okay. All right, let's go up from the education one. Let's go down a couple more, please.
Can I just make one comment? I know we can't talk about how they spend money, but one of my concerns is spending $100,000 on a social studies coach for children that are coming out of second, third, and fourth grade. Where are we missing the loop in second, third, and fourth grade that they need a $100,000 coach?
I'm not saying there isn't. I'm trying to understand what you.
No, I know. I'm just,
Again,
that's just food for thought.
Because I can bet you tomorrow I'm going to get asked what that $300,000 cut was.
No, this
I can
had
bet you bottom
This had
dollar.
nothing to do with that. That was just something that I struggled with.
Yeah, we all struggle with things. I get that. And okay, let's go down. But I appreciate it, Harry. I do. It's not that. It's just we're going to get the calls next on this budget, and what does that mean? We're going to get asked. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Marcia, debt service, I think we all understand. All right, capital, my opinion, and I'll let you all go through it, I just don't have my train of thought here, is I do agree with your thought process of we don't know what this number is. It's a $6 million number. I did quite a bit of research on it. If we went with the state, it seemed like the last time I went with the state got $2 million back.
You're talking about the police?
Yeah, the police radio. It ended up to be a $4 million project. I struggle with bonding this at $6 million again now. I thought your process, Tara, and Marcia's process was, can we do a special bonding at some point that would make more sense instead of bonding in excess? Now, it may mean this number's bigger. We don't know yet, and I appreciate that, but I think your process on this I really liked. That let's find out the number before we make the bond.
Absolutely. There's a lot of work to be done here. The gentleman from the state that Marcia was gracious enough to put me in touch with is willing to have a conference. In fact, I was going to set up something so we can all be on board with what that sounds like, similar to what we did with the other consultant. And then Senator Minor and Representative Harding and I are going to have a conversation about it on Friday to kind of try to figure out if there's any way to go after some state or federal funding. I mean, I think we need to seriously explore all options here. And like you, I'm not comfortable with this $6 million bond, but I also, does the benefit outweigh the risk at some point? And we've all been told that we're operating on borrowed time with the system we've got.
Yes, and I also agree with we're operating on borrowed time with interest rates. And that's where Ryan and Dan and the rest of this crew are smarter than I am. But I'm more comfortable with the approach that you brought up. And I So I said my things I don't like. I thought this is a great idea. I'm on board with that. All right.
No interest rate hike is going to make up for millions of dollars of extra volume.
No,
The number outweighs the interest rate.
Yeah.
Hands down. So interest rate should not be a discussion point when it comes to should we bond for 2 or 6.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I like the idea of the way you presented it. Okay, let's keep going, and then I'm going to turn this over to everybody. The ARF I'm okay with. The hardships, I agree. Okay. Yep, understand that. Yep. All right, here we go. That I'm okay with. This I'm okay with. This we're good with. This we did, go back. Let's go back one. Hold on before we get to OPEB. And then, like I say, the rest of the team can take over because then one more back, Marcia. We did this one year, you're right. It's, how comfortable are you with this $100,000 number?
Is that Tara or me?
Oh, how's that? Oh,
So for my response, I would say, I like to be conservative and would prefer not to put it in unless I was sure we were going to get it. But I don't think that that's responsible either. That looking back, I have an analysis. We've always had more than $100,000.
In what, from what? What are the sources of that? And what are associated expenses that net that out?
there, right? The control interest.
Yeah, so I mean.
So a lot of the sources have been KERMA, that it's not guaranteed, although we have had it every year. The controlling interest tax, I think last year that was 171,000. We would have no idea when that comes in. That FEMA we've had, and we get it, we do have extra costs, but we've not ever done an additional appropriation for those costs. And FEMA, we get more than our costs. For example, this last one, the number of hours that Kevin spent, he calculated that just doing that FEMA grant took over 10% of his annual hours. That and we for the 5%, and we got reimbursed for all of it. So there's some costs that are already budgeted that we're getting reimbursed for. And we've had 5 FEMA grants, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 since in the 3 years that I've been here. We have excesses in some of the other ones that we do a 5-year average. But we've had some really good tax collections. We've had extra money in any number of those. We rarely our budgets are rarely over, revenue budgets are rarely over what we collect. So it could be any of those sources.
How much does that really move the needle? I mean, what does it move it from 3.15 to 3.17?
Yeah, it doesn't move it much. It doesn't move it much, but on the other hand, we don't want people to say, "Oh, you're overtaxing us because you're too conservative." I might say that I have been accused of being too conservative before.
So the KERMA one is probably the most. We don't, we call it, repeating, not necessarily recurring. So we can't predict it, we can't guarantee it, but pattern recognition might suggest it'll be there. That might be something that we can model out. I'm not comfortable suggesting that we're going to get another natural disaster that's going to be a windfall to revenue. So I would remove that from the analysis altogether. But if we wanted to say, here's what we got KERMA over the last 5 years, and we can average that out and make that a prediction, that might be something that's reasonable. But aside from that,
but we do have
holding back to those magic revenues, I wouldn't be comfortable with.
We do have Isaiah's money coming in this year that happened in August of 2020, if I've got my names right here. And that's coming in this year. Almost exactly a year later, we've now got IDA, and we have costs with IDA. So I'm assuming those won't come in till next year. That so that's some of the FEMA, that it wasn't a new storm. It was an existing storm that's already happened. The vaccination that costs, we were paying out of the general fund last year, that we're very far behind. We're working on the vaccination grant now, since we just finished our vaccination clinics. This year, we're putting the vaccination costs in as a special revenue fund, so we don't keep doing this iterative budget process. But last year, it was in the iterative budget process, so we should be getting some reimbursement from that. I don't know if it's going to be this year or next year, but that's where the FEMA was talking. We do get some money extra. We've had over the years, Jules is reminding me, that in sale of assets, but we did try to capture that in the sale of asset category itself.
All right,
and then
next slide.
Apparently my whole team is listening, because Kevin tells me that that Isaiah, the total that we're looking for on that is 220. That and maybe he'll text me and tell me if we have a number for IDA yet.
Whoa. Now you open up another door. What do you mean you got 220 coming in if we got 100 down? Do we have 220 coming in, or do we have 100?
That's coming in. Isaiah was in August of 2020. And it's coming in this year. We hope that we'll get the rest of it this year. And so that's why I was thinking that IDA would have a similar timing, but for next year. That, but I don't know if we have IDA numbers yet. And I will tell you if I get a text with that.
All right. Go ahead then.
All right, keep
Next
going
slide.
down.
Please. Yeah, please. Okay, here. Then keep going, next slide then. Keep going, next slide. Next slide. Right here, this graph. Whoa, don't go any further, please. Come on back. No. Come on.
One with the yellow face.
This graph shows a lot, but it doesn't show the intersecting line of where we break even. I understand the 7.5 million, the yellow. I understand the brown is a reducing liability on the town. I understand the difference is $3 million in the middle of that pie. Where does that and those two lines, where do they cross? What year do they cross?
It depends on how long these people are going to live.
So we're looking at, we have 1 million in the bank right now, and we're looking at a $3 million liability right now. So
Yes.
that line could go out straight for quite a while, and we'd still be looking at a $3 million or basically a $2 million liability on our heads. Correct?
That's correct. And this is the net. This is the net liability. So we don't want to subtract the million from it.
No, I get that. I get that the yellow is something that's going to go away totally. It's the brown to the top of the yellow line that's the intersecting line, and that's $3 million now. We have $1 million in there.
But
so,
this is after the million, so it would be 4 million if without our million that's in there, because this is the net liability.
So we're worse off.
Correct. I don't want to give. That is correct.
Yeah, I mean, so then go on to the next slide, because I'm going to roll both of them into each other here. I think this is going to be next slide, because so now we're looking at this. So what we've done here is, and I'm sort of lost, is we set forth a budget that we're not funding either of these retirements or liabilities. We took out the Opeb. We know we have another rising liability, but yet we didn't address either one of them. So we have one that's growing on us that we didn't address, and we have one that isn't shrinking all the way on us that we didn't address. Why didn't we address them? Because one of these has to be addressed, because at some point, this is a liability. And we're just getting through a debt bubble coming up. We have a lot more things we got to do as a town. And yet, if we're going to ignore both of these liabilities, we have a problem. And again, you know, did we use the word balance the budget to get to this? And this was an easy out, take the 200,000 out of OPEB and not fund this? Or because the RBAC committee is adamant to fund OPEB? That was my question. They are like, we made this agreement, we did this with everybody, the bond rating people, everybody we did this with. Why aren't we funding the OPEB? Now, we didn't do it during COVID because it was COVID. We really didn't have anything really to grasp onto. We were trying to get through crisis. Why are we not funding either one of these in the selectmen's budget? Because it's almost like you're asking the Board of Finance right now that we have these liabilities out, put it back in. Because we have to almost put it back in. I'm sort of lost of why we ignored this. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean,
the policy, that the agreement, as you call it, was done in 2015 when the liability was 20 million. We haven't followed that ever. That maybe we did in 16. That but we should have 2 years ago have funded $1 million, and we didn't do that. And because we weren't doing that, that's when the Board of Selectmen made this motion that it would be adjusted on a year-to-year basis. That so the reason that we're not funding it, well, one is we've never funded the firefighters. We just acknowledged it as a liability in 2018. We've never funded it. We don't even have a trust set up to fund it. That
right.
So the reason that we were thinking of not to fund it is exactly because we did talk to our financial advisor, and we did say, you know, what do you think would be the result? I mean, we saw what they said formally on their report that let me find it, that so we saw this, but what do you think would be the result if we didn't fund it again, because we're going through this debt bubble? And he didn't believe it would move the needle one way or the other. Our debt is our bigger issue. This is a future liability, so it's similar to our little car over here. That are we going?
Don't go that car. Don't go the car, Marcia. Don't go the car yet. That's another whole story. The car story. Okay?
But are we going
don't go the car yet.
Are we going to take out, you know, raise taxes or move something over to bond it this year so we don't have debt in the future? So that was the decision. You can make a different decision, but that was the decision on the thought process on this.
Guess I'm struggling with the point of we have two liabilities hanging out there that we're not really addressing. I mean, we're sort of ignoring them, and we almost have to address one or the other or a little bit of both, I think, because again, we're going to come out of this debt bubble and we're going to be looking at a lot more things. I mean, new schools. I mean, let's talk about the Wiskineer Wall. The Wiskineer Wall on here is up to $600,000, this number.
Between 5 and 7.
Okay, 5 and 7. So we are going to have these expenditures, and every time we don't fund a liability, I would much rather go with a 3.3% budget or a 3.4% budget and sell it to the town as we really need this, instead of trying to balance it down and ignore liabilities.
But you want to think about you want to think about our liabilities. Yes, we have this 3 million, we have this 3 million, but we have 120 million of bonds, and we push those from 30 years to 20 years. So that's where we're addressing the liabilities, is we're paying those off 5 years faster. We could have moved those to 30 years. Oh, we could have made a nice dent in this Opeb liability, but that's not what the decision was. So I don't know that we're not there are other liabilities, and that's the biggest one, that we're cutting off 10 years on that bonding.
Okay. All right, let's go to your car now. That one sort of really got lost on.
I got very lost too, so you can
So,
start
yeah,
from scratch.
I got it.
The
So
reserve.
let me ask a few questions here, then you can jump. Do we know how many vehicles we need, the dollar amounts we need in the next 10 years? Have we looked at the fire side, what they have, the fire departments, what they have in their banks? Have we done a cash flow for 10 years to see where we really stand without these? Because I think what you're going to find is there's a lot of vehicles coming in the next 10 years. Do you have any idea what vehicles and the dollar amounts we're looking at?
So
As I said, let me go first, Marcia. When I sat in on the capital committee with Ricky and Ryan, we were there for some of that. We touched on the vehicles, and actually I would put that question right back on you, Glenn, because there's a 10-year plan that I'm
All right,
now.
I'll take this. Let's go, Dan. Put me on. I'll take over the screen. Let's go. Let's drive.
I'm gonna put it up from my side.
Put your seat,
Yeah, let's drive.
or maybe we should put our seat.
I'll take the challenge.
Okay, good.
Right there, yeah.
As far as our current inventory, I did ask for departments to, take a look at what they've got and do a reshuffle, so we're not buying cars while cars are outrageously expensive. And I know Kevin was working on that.
All right.
I'm just gonna share it off so the people outside can see it too. Share Excel.
Too much technology here.
Okay, let's just make it a bit bigger so it takes up more of the screen for people at home. There you go.
All right. So if we go to the center 10-year cash flow, you have vehicles, the town side is going to have liability of $534,000 this year, $399 and $225, $861 and $228, and $738. So if we actually do fund these, you can balance this out by $135, and have a third year of $129. We can level this all out. I get what Marcia's saying here, that we don't put a reserve in for the center for our fire because you're going to drop out the $359. If you use the reserve and you take what we have, you're going to have 350, whatever that number is, I can't read. 359 would be the town side, which you can deal with ARPA, whatever you want to deal with. I get that. But then if we fund it next year on these, we can balance out where it's only like $130,000 a year. And we don't hit a big number ever if we really look at this. Now, it holds true with center logic, but if you do the same thing with Candlewood, the Candlewood 10-year cash flow is, if we don't fund it, you're going to be looking at $600,000 here in 25. We're just getting out of this debt bubble, and we're going to have more big liabilities ahead of us. Why wouldn't we fund the reserves of like $80,000 this year, level it out to the point where when we go to buy this vehicle, we're looking at 80, 80, 80, and 105. This is something the town can swallow. This is something that we can handle. This is not something, if we do zeros, now we're going to be looking at $600,000 in year 2026. And who knows what else we're going to have in 2026. Why are we looking to get to a number, and we need to plan ahead? That driving the car away works for one car at home. We're looking at 7 cars we got to buy in 10 years. Now, again, we go back here. I get here. Again, we don't put in a reserve this year in the center, and we don't put in the reserve here for the EMS vehicle. But you can see that if we do continue with this practice and don't make it that easy cut, we can flatline these vehicles. We're at a point of they're not going to cost the town a significant amount. We can't take these large hits in single years because those large hits in single years make us determine other decisions. We're taking, your decision this year on capital was we have a $6 million police radio in capital this year. We can't afford to do 20 other projects. So the same thing's going to happen now in 26. The same thing's going to happen in 25, where we're going to be neglecting the town's needs because we have a big nut in front of us. And that's why we put these reserves in. And this is what we need to do, in my opinion.
When
Now,
was this document created?
I did this morning. This is my morning coffee documents, okay? So you look at your education, I hear what you're saying on the 300,000, okay? But if we put in back in and this is what their 3-year model looks like. And these are the things that, you know, when you say clairvoyant, I go nutso because every decision I look at, I play with models. I build these things out. So I know next year, status quo, the Board of Ed is at 369 out the gate next year. They can't get away from 3.69. That's only based on their status quo salaries and their ESSER grant money. Nothing else. They're going to be at 369 next year. They're also going to be at 3.54 the following year with adding nothing. This is no extras. This is strictly what's in the budget now. What we approve now in the budget this year, those are the numbers that are going to come out the backside. They can't get away from it. They're not going to get away from salaries. They're not going to get, and I'm only increasing their overall salaries by 2.3, and this is including their contractual transportation and everything else. You're not going to get away from these numbers. So again, I've done this work. Now, when we start talking about tax increases, let's see here. I can't. This here, and this is where we have to pay attention of what we're cutting versus the value. This is my house. So my house was assessed at whatever, 248 this year. It was 213. With a 5% increase on this budget, my taxes are going to go up $123 this year with a 5% increase. Now, I was about on the average. I get the people that are going to be 37%, and we have to be careful of that. But again, we need to fund the town to the point of we're not going to suffocate the town. Now, I'm not saying go to 4% or 5% or 6%, but these reserves to me are really something that we are going to choke ourselves down if we don't fund them and if we don't look at this. Because every year we're going to be facing a $6 million or some kind of nut that we can't crunch, and it's going to deter us from doing the 5 other. I'm sure when you went through the capital project list, there was 5 projects you wanted to do.
Absolutely, one more.
But you cut them out because why? Because you had a $6 million radio you were looking at.
Well, I was going off of the work of the capital committee as a starting point. It wasn't my decision alone at that point.
So the capital committee is the one that said cut everything out besides the $6 million.
No, absolutely
Okay, no,
not.
that's what I'm trying to.
They did their work to come up with something that was reasonable as well.
And then when you say when I'm talking salaries, yeah, I did do my homework. So I can show you here. We did this. You are the highest paid in the area, by the way, besides the mayor of Danbury. We did this. You didn't inherit. You inherited this. But I'm saying even if you look across the board, like the town clerk area, and I think the town clerk does a good job. She's the highest paid in the area. And I did all the towns I chose were New Milford,
New Milford is
Monroe,
just went through a salary.
Newtown, Southbury, Woodbury, New Fairfield, and Danbury. And I guess this has always been a crawl with me is I did this morning between 9 and 9:30.
I've been looking at it for 3 months, Glenn. Look, I mean, you can't compare, this is apples to oranges in a lot of ways, you know? It's all we have to compare, but
It truly is because
we also need to look back at.
we work 35 hours a week and these towns work 37, 5, and 40 hours a week. So out the gate, we're at a 13% premium to other towns. And I guess this is when we're looking at positions and these year raises that we put forth and things. You haven't, but I'm just saying these don't fall into these categories, and they really get us askew to the point of, and that's why I was nailing, we have to be careful with the police, we have to be careful with these raises that we give outside of what they are, because we get askewed. Again, we're on the 35-hour week, these towns are on 37 and 40-hour weeks. If you really break it down on per hour.
Yeah, I didn't bring up anything in the budget for salary other than the police. The library one that was listed was something that was done out of cycle that I also inherited, and we now have to incorporate into next year's budget. As far as the police, I'll say again, I think it's valid. I think it's something that that you as a Board of Finance should scrutinize and see if it makes sense. I don't think $14,000 to give our top leadership on a police force that protect our town is asking too much.
This is something actually that Marcia made, and I worked with her, changed it up a little bit and discussed with her. But I think this is something we should get out also to people to see what are their taxes really going to do.
I remember the first time I met you, you handed me a spreadsheet and said, do you know how much your taxes went up this year? $8 a month.
But these are decisions we're asking our townspeople to make. And I think if it's rational, like, I'll be honest with you, I don't mind paying an extra $123 a year to get the services we need. And I think we have a big debt ahead of us. You're right, the bubble. We have to be conservative. I do agree with your fiscally, but we can't be fiscally choking ourselves off either, because that's going to cause us an issue down the road. And I guess too, I pushed you to get, to focus on this. I pushed you in a lot of ways to get this, but I'm at a point where I think we got to be really careful of, are we going to hurt the town by trying to get to a number of 3 points that balance in the thing, or do we really need to look at this on a bigger scale of what is the 5-year knock? What is the 10-year knock? It's important, I think, for all of us to consider that. Now, I know we're not going to win this year, because you're going to have the lake people at 37% looking at a 5% increase. I did one house, taxes are going to go up $1,000 a month. So that's going to be a problem. But I don't know what the majority is. And I don't know if the tax assessor can go through this and see how many houses are more around the 20% and what the fallout is. But I think we need to be very careful.
Yeah, I concur 100%. I would say too, there's other factors that we also need to consider, maybe on the periphery, and I put it in the spotlight in other forms of communication. We've got kind of a lot happening. We're considering the option of going to a health district. Is that going to save us money? We're considering what a fire tax might look like for the fire district. I mean, there's other things that we also need to
the fire
work
tax
on
is
to move us along.
That you really, are you talking with council on that? Because the fire district has to be done by the residents of the district.
Yeah, I mean,
The town can't impose that.
nascent conversation.
All right. So you have my stuff.
Thank you,
All
Glenn.
right, let's go back to the other slides, please. Go ahead, Marcia. Thank you. All right, we talked about the car.
Got a dent in it, though.
Yeah, it does have a dent in it. It's just how I look at things. I run my house this way. I don't run my house of, we're going to pay a big thing down the road. I run my house, let's prepare. And we do have the means. We're not at that stage yet of we don't have the means to do this. So go ahead, next. We talked about this. Okay, I am okay here because I'm going to turn this over to everybody else in a minute. All right, none left. All right, I've done my share. Go ahead, Dan.
We talked about a lot of this before, so you covered much of it. The reserves were a big issue for me. So you handled that quite nicely. I think that, you know, when we talked about it, when you and I, when all of us ran, balancing current year and long-term health is the critical job of the Board of Finance. So I'm looking hard, and Glenn, if you can send me those numbers, I'd love to study them. That's great work. I mean, I don't need to, I have a number of really in the weeds questions that we can email out, or we can talk to specific departments about. Quite honestly, I don't need to go through them in detail. I do have a couple questions for you, Tara, on the transmittal letter.
Yes.
And comparing the specific goals that were laid out versus the numbers that were in there, and just trying to match them up.
Sure.
Sure. So in one statement that was made in the letter was that you made some operational changes to keep the budget nearly flat. I think that's a quote. And I'm just wondering what those changes were, what the impact was, and where we can see those in the budget items. I'm not sure where in the budget is flat, but that's.
Yeah, so if you take your budget.
Yep.
And then look by section, in different areas, you'll see some increases, and some decreases by department. If you start with my office, for example, we're at a 0.53% increase.
Right. So what, I mean, specifically operational change, I'm just curious, the operational changes that you referenced in the letter, I'm just curious how that flows through versus.
Where are you in the letter? Oh, I think towards the back, right? You're talking about that sentence that says keeping it flat.
I'm not going to find that specific line,
Yeah.
but here, under one, town operating budget, general government, first bullet. I've made some operational changes to keep this budget nearly flat, and I continue to review systems and processes to achieve a more efficient and effective operation. I'm just curious what some examples
Which
of those
letter
might
are
be.
you talking about? The first letter?
This is the one you
The
sent out.
transmittal letter on the 15th.
Your
That was,
selection.
yeah,
your
that was
first-
the initial before the Board of Selectmen convened, so I don't have that letter with me right now.
Okay, but you clearly suggested that you made some changes, so I'm just wondering what they were.
I mean, I'd have to
Okay.
go back and find that letter. I can get back to you on that.
Okay.
And you've had this letter since the 15th of February, so a lot has changed since then,
But has it, because it's the same number. In reality, it's basically your budget. Dan made the changes between your budget and the Board of Selectmen budget, in your Excel, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, there really wasn't major
No.
changes, on the budget.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. No, I mean, again, my biggest issue was the reserves. And again, in the letter, I'm talking about the 15th, but that those were clearly the goals and the values at that time. And I think you reiterated them, that funding the capital requirements of the town is critical. And again, I'm taking a quote that although it's an easy budget to make significant cuts, the short-term gain is long-term consequences, talking about funding the needs. We're facing the consequences now of years, maybe decades of underfunding capital projects. And that kind of, to me, flew in the face of cutting the reserves as Glenn pointed out. So I think we're going to take a hard look at that over the coming weeks.
Dan, do you think they need to be at 100,000 or more? Could they be less than that?
I got to study Glenn's numbers, but,
Okay.
and I also, I have a question for Marcia, because I was confused. We funded most of the reserves for equipment out of cash, not bonding. So I thought your slide suggested that by cutting the reserves, we were reducing the bonding, but I think that most of the reserves are funded out of cash. Am I incorrect?
That's my interpretation.
We always have to fund the reserves out of cash because we can't bond for them. But as we were going through and looking at the decisions and then trying to say, okay, what if we put this reserve back in? Then when we did that, we said, oh, well, we can't afford the bottom line. And we would have to move something else then over to bonding. But it sounds like you're suggesting we increase the taxes to fund the reserves.
Or make cuts elsewhere, which
Or make cuts
It's on the
elsewhere.
table.
Right.
It's on the table, absolutely.
gotta be. What those cuts are, we can talk about over the coming weeks, but, really, no, I don't see any cuts that were made other than to long-term things that don't affect this year. But the only cuts that were made to the budget were reserves and Opeb and things. Nothing else, no positions, no salaries, so no cuts were made. Not
It
because
was departmental cuts. There was
Yeah,
departmental
at
cuts,
the
but
very
they were
beginning,
a
we
few
were at
thousand
over
here,
60%.
500 there. Well, that comes from the big numbers, though. That comes with 200,000 OPEB moves your needle. I mean, not the reserves. You reduced with reserves and OPEB, you reduced it down 1%, which to me is not really a true cut, or it was an easy pick to take from and move the big number. I think what Dan's saying is, where were the harder cuts?
Right.
Because again, you took 300,000 from the Board of Ed, to balance the budget, the number that you picked to balance the budget. You took 200,000 from OPEB. You took 500,000 from the cash capital reserves. So you took 1.5% off of with no real direct operational cuts. Your operational cuts.
Every single operational cut that I've made.
Yeah, there's $500 from the Sandalwood Fire Department. There's $6,000 from land use, going to exhibition, travel and conferences.
That makes sense.
There's 200 in one department. You made a lot of cuts. Yes, you absolutely made a lot of cuts. But I think Dan's thing is, those are all small cuts. We didn't get a huge cut or deduction in the operational side of things, other than reserves and the OPEB. The rest were all little cuts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, you made a lot of them. I will say, because I took an Excel and just made a list of your cuts, there was a lot of cuts. You took a big cut in your legal side of things. You took out like 45,000 out of your legal budget because, and I don't understand that because we're in a reval year.
Right.
And that's another thing we have to go through, because reval years have generally been our higher legal bills. Because especially this year, if I'm sitting on the lake with a 37% increase and I'm looking at a 3% increase and I'm looking at a $1,000 increase, I'm going to come back to the town and say,
Yeah,
hey.
and the town attorney went over that with us. Those were cuts that they.
So they're going to do all this work. If we
No.
have 100 homes fight
So-
for reval, they're going to do all that work for free. And then our retainer.
Can I address that?
Yeah, please.
That,
Yeah.
so what we tried to do was be strategic, that, they had come up that it sounds like based on the cost per, case, that they're gonna be lower than what we had been paying. And so there was an estimate of the number of cases they would be started this year. And we originally had 45,000 in this year and 45,000 in next year. And we had a meeting with the attorney, we discussed it, and they said, they would really know the cases that they would have this year. And so the thought process, and I have it written, if you have the Excel, it's written off to the side, is that by the end of the year, we have John Smith that's got a case. We would encumber the John Smith money from this year and carry it into next year. And there would be an additional, I forgot what the number is, maybe $10,000 for cases that weren't encumbered this year. So that was, and nobody knows until the Board of Assessment Appeals is done with the cases. But that was done based on discussions with the attorney, their estimates of how much it would cost per case, which is significantly lower than what we were paying. but we won't know the cases until, I think that, the Board of Assessment Appeals has to be done by the end of this month, or sometime next month. So we don't even know the cases yet.
We have no idea how many are in the queue.
She didn't say 100, that's for sure, Tammy.
Yeah, I don't know the number. I mean, again, I get that's an artificial number, but we should know how many's in the queue right now. We should know, is it 30, 40, 50? What is the thing? I mean,
Yeah.
again, I get the feeling we're cutting these budgets down in these areas, and yet we don't have the knowns. What is the known? I mean, if we cut this down, the legal costs down, and they come back to us and say, you know what, the caseload is more and it went bigger, we need an extra 40,000. Where are we going to get the 40,000 if they need it?
I mean, your point is valid. We could say that for every single item on everything on the budget. The price of gas is a perfect example of that. Nobody knows what that's going to look like,
Nope.
especially if, God forbid, we go to war. So, I mean, yes, Tammy probably does have a better sense today. I haven't asked her since the last time we talked about it with the attorneys, but I can find out.
But to me, that's not an unknown, it's a known. If we know there's 50 people cases right now,
Yeah.
we know the maximum liability. You're right, gas is an unknown. We could be paying 10, but if I know I have 50 cases that are in the queue right now, and all of them could come to fruition, and it costs me 5,000 per case, or 500 per case, or 100 per case, I can project out my total liability, and then we can base it off of, do we think 50% or 70%? Instead, I don't know, in recent reval years, Steve has always had issues with legal fees. He's always come back and said, we need $20,000 more of the legal fees in reval years. This has been, something that's come up. Legal fees in reval years and legal fees in contracts. We don't have any contracts coming either, I take it, right? They're all done? Marcia, are they all done?
The ones that were out
They are, the union contracts are all done.
And how long are they done for?
5 years.
Okay, so we don't need legal fees pretty much for any negotiations.
That is correct.
And if the legal number makes a little more sense if we don't have that. But I think in a reval year, we need to look at the cases and see. But I think that's what you're driving at, though, right? There's no big numbers that are driving a cut or a change in the process, I guess, of where we're headed. I don't have any answers on how to get there either.
My
So let's
train
be
of thought,
clear.
correct me, Steve, if I'm wrong, or Tara, was, my view was, I wasn't trying to find a major cut for departments or personnel to put them in jeopardy, either work-wise or through technology or anything. So that's why the lower hanging fruit was more attractive to me.
Yeah, I agree. It is attractive. I mean,
Yeah.
I see that,
Yeah,
and I understand.
And not that it's attractive, but it's
Right,
more
but, yeah.
attractive than putting
Right.
companies,
Yeah,
departments
right.
and stuff.
I do have some, we'll get into it, but some questions about some of the cost benefit of some of the specific cuts that, you cut a couple thousand here versus what are you losing for that specific couple $1,000 cut is some questions that we'll get into, not tonight. The only other information request, it looks like you have a pretty fully allocated ARPA plan of where the entire $5.3 million is planned between capital and lost revenue and timing of that out. Is there a way to get that all in one spreadsheet of where the 5.3?
Yeah, it's actually on one of the, if we
Yeah, we don't have to.
provide the slides. So, yeah,
Okay.
to your question.
Great.
And just so it's clear, that's not fully allocated. What's
Okay.
built into the budget and has already been designated as being ARPA funded for capital is what we're proposing to the Board of Finance. All the other outliers are still
Works in
up for
progress.
conversation, and we
Cool.
have until 2024 to
Right.
finalize that.
But if we are kind of earmarking big chunks of it for future one-time revenue sources, that should also be kind of, if not specifically allocated, at least footnoted that those are,
Thank
to
you.
use the term lockbox.
Yeah,
You just triggered my thoughts
Yes.
too. Thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry.
go ahead.
The buybacks that we talked about with the Board of Ed, the buy aheads, pay aheads, you had $150,000 on one of the slides.
Yeah.
We need to make sure, in my opinion, because I'm only one person of this board, is These are not done for salaries or something that we got to double dip down the road. This has to be a one-time off purchase of furniture, computers, something that will not come back to us and be a reoccurring budget process. Because again, all we're doing is inflating the budget down the road. We're hiding a place that we're trying to save money in the budget, but we're creating a bigger mountain year 2 and year 3 down the road. So I'm all for, if there is money that we can use in this year's budget that's excess to supplement the $300,000 cut, that we can give them, like I say, if it's furniture, desks, computers, supplies, within reason, because that's another thing that carries over, but something that's, I think that's the way to go, instead of, we're gonna supplement a salary, because if we supplement this, that's what's getting them in trouble with the ESSER grant.
Right.
And we're gonna have that discussion with the Board of Ed, is their ESSER grant adds, you had said 1 position, it adds 6 positions. There are 6 positions in their ESSER grant. And it's IT for schools, it's social studies, it's science, it's some math teachers, I believe. There's 6 positions almost in there, or 5 at least at a minimum. These are things now that went into the budget in midterm that are going to be carried into the budget from here to wherever. And that's where they're into trouble. Than what I showed on my Excel sheet of they're at 3.6 and they're at 3.45 without adding anything. So we don't want to compound that by giving them the 150,000, let them use 150,000 from this year's budget to bridge over.
Yeah.
So it has to be done. And my understanding was they were going to come talk to you and Marcia. Marcia, is that your understanding? You there?
I
Did we lose
am,
you?
can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Could you just repeat the sentence, because I was
My
distracted.
understanding is that the Board of Ed is going to come, the Board of Ed or Ken and John are going to come talk to you and Tara about the 150,000 or whatever dollars that we're going to supplement from this year's surplus and buy into stuff ahead for next year's Board of Ed budget. Is that correct in my understanding?
I would imagine so, that we talked about it, but when we talked about it, we said, hey, that this has got to be agreed on by everybody. So we didn't make any promises on that.
So I think it would behoove us all to do that and to see what could be done with the surplus as an
Yes.
option for us. I mean,
Yes,
you put it in your presentation.
yes, they were
Right.
going back, to look at that, to talk about how they could do that. But to be honest, with the encumbrance policy right now that we have, there's things that are being encumbered currently in like year end 21 that they could easily do that with. But they were going to go back and look at that. But as it stands, that we just said that we were going to propose this, but the Board of Selectmen would have to agree and the Board of Finance would have to agree before we could, and we would have to have surplus there. So we were trying to say, no promises yet.
Okay. Okay, Mary?
Yeah, well, you guys hit almost everything that, I had made note of. I was especially interested in that miscellaneous other revenue, that went from 3,000 to the 100,000 there. So we talked about that a bit. And, being new at this, when I see things like, the reserves kind of missing and the funding tensions, so it kind of looks attractive this year, but what does that do to us future years down the road? And like you said, I'm sure we'll discuss that more too. And definitely agree with, one-time money should basically be for sort of a one-time expense.
Okay. Ryan?
Yeah, so in the spotlight, I know you had mentioned that we're trying to keep bonding down. I don't think not funding reserves is going to keep bonding down long term. I think that's one of the concerns I have.
Mm-hmm.
I think we, being part of the capital committee, we really pushed that we need to fund reserves. So that was kind of disappointing to see those cut. I think there's a lot of other things that we, harder cuts as Harry had mentioned, but I think those things could benefit the town more. I mean, the goal long term is to, obviously keep taxes low. We are in a environment where money is cheaper than it will be. You have 7% inflation. That is just continue to compound. So I don't think cutting things now in terms of reserves is really smart. So I think that's just something we're going to need to talk about. I mean, that's the main thing I had. You know, the Opeb liability, I totally understand where Marcia's coming from, because reducing long-term liability will free up opportunity for paying that down the line. But I really think the reserves are something that we really should consider. And that's pretty much all I had. You know, Glenn had hit on. Actually, one other thing I noticed in the I noticed we increased revenue on the EMS vehicle. Do we have support for that? Are we comfortable with that number? I think it was 88,000. The EMS. It looked like we added an EMS and there was increased billings.
So that was a suggestion by the EMS team themselves. That they talked amongst themselves and they felt comfortable that they could meet that new number.
Okay, they're comfortable with that. That was my question.
Yep.
Great.
So on the EMS and Brookfield and the fire department, that I don't know if we've sent you the justification forms, but many of those cuts were and the increase in the revenue were things that they had suggested. That so they're not. So they were helping us cut down their budget, because it was originally close to a 50% increase.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Eileen?
Yeah, I really just want to reiterate what both Glenn and Dan have said about, you know, the reserves being cut was a bit of a surprise for me. You know, the lack of contribution for the LoSiP and the Opeb, I think, are concerning, but I think we can discuss that in our further deliberations. I also am not in agreement with the $300,000 cut on the school side to quote unquote balance. I think that, you know, we need to look at that in better detail, and it just seems like that was an easy, it felt a little more indiscriminate than it needs to be. But I think most of the other things that I've looked at are more line items that we can discuss later. Probably not really for tonight's meeting, but in the meetings to come.
Thank you. Brianna, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Good to be back. Echoing kind of what everybody said with Eileen about the cut of the 300 and some of the other cuts. I don't think anything that I have to add right now is worth it tonight. It'll probably just come up over our general budget discussions as I see everything unfold. It's nothing, it's just everything has to just be looked into.
Sure. Harry, you want to add anything?
We're not being televised, right?
Here we are.
Are we? Oh,
We're
great.
live, yeah.
I just want the residents to understand the level of professionalism and knowledge in finance that's sitting at this table. And I'm looking out because, you know, I'm not the biggest finance person, but this budget's being washed and rinsed and washed and rinsed and washed and rinsed. And it's nice to have a low budget, but we've been able to see now, and it's been an eye-opener, that when you just cut the budget to have a low number, you're going to pay for it in spades later on. And I just want people to understand the quality sitting at this table who are fiduciarily responsible for their money. And I'm proud to be a part of it. And really, that's my comment.
Thank you. I will say I do think there was work put in this, and I will admit that. And I did push you to get to a level to see how it would all wash out. I think now we have to look at what we talked about tonight.
We have to look at refining this. The number might not be 3.15. The number may be 2.8. I don't know. Maybe 3.9. The questions I asked were to see what were the thought processes behind this and to push a little bit of where your thought processes were and what the goals were so we could help support the goals. I have fundamental, like disagreements, obviously, on how my household is run at the point of I don't like to have big nuts ahead of me. I like to be smooth rolling, so I know I don't have to worry about things. The reserves, like I say, I think more than likely, I would like to see us go through it again together to put some things back into this budget and to put it to vote. And then if the town voters bring it down, then we have to look more at the reserves. Then we have to look more at the OPEB funding. I think that the stretch of going from 3.15 to 3.6 isn't going to make that much of a difference on our residents as a general, but we're going to look at it. I mean, I'm just throwing these out. I
did that too. Yeah.
haven't played it out, as I think that, again, you and Harry and Steve's inputs will accept during this whole process of, I think we need to get to a number that not only works for today, but works for the next 3 years or 4 years down the road. I didn't like some of the numbers that I expressed, but like I said, I did like the thought process again on the radios. Let's figure that number out, because that could be $1 million differential that we can have a better idea. In fairness to my board, Tara sent me an email 2 days ago of a consultant for I'd looked through consultant fees. They're anywhere from $60,000 to $200,000, and it seems like the consultant that Tara was talking to that the town used was like $29,000. 39,000. Okay, I apologize. I think that's more in line maybe to get us. That's a decision that you'd have to make, but I think that may be more in line for us to see what this number is. I think it would behoove us to try to figure this number out faster, as soon as possible. But I liked your approach of, can we do a special bonding or save? And I don't know, Steve knows more about that, and Tara and Marcia, you might know, is can we put bonding off a little bit and bond later in the year when we know this number? Because the rest of the capital projects you're putting forward aren't much money, I don't think. I mean, I got to look at it more. But I think that would make more sense.
Typically, you try to fund it directly out of our cash reserves because $6 million isn't worth going out onto the street. You build it up for 2 or 3 years, get up to a reasonable amount is what our financial advisor would recommend, because you pay certain fixed fees to go out to the street,
Right.
whether you're borrowing $6 million or $18 million.
Right. So that's like going to be, your guys' thing. I mean, but I like the idea of maybe doing that bonding when we know the number. I don't want to get into, and again, it's me personally speaking, I apologize. I don't want to get another boys' locker room where we bonded 1.3 million and the number is 3 million. Now we're trying to bring it down to 2 point something million. I don't want to see the same thing happen with the radios. I don't want to be bonding $6 million and come in at 4. Because then we squandered, we didn't squander because we had $2 million, but we squandered opportunities to support other projects. So I'm so on board with that. I think that's about it for tonight. I think this number came in where we expected it, more than the discussions we had about the zeros and the least. I think that this number is realistic. I think it can go up a little bit. I really believe that we can get behind this and sell it to the town a little bit higher than where we're at, and show them that we need to be careful about 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, and 4 years down the road.
Yeah, I think, if I may, I
Yeah.
think that, it's not a perfect product. Obviously, that's why you guys were elected to do what it is that you do, and I'm thankful for all of you. And to echo Harry's sentiment, there was a lot of really hard work put in by town employees across all departments and boards and commissions that weighed in, and people that I've been talking to and learning from, and it's especially Marcia, and I just want to thank her specifically. I know she's not physically here, but somewhere out there, Marcia, but she's a true asset to Brookfield, and without her, I don't know where I would be. So thank you, Marcia, and on behalf of all of us, I look forward to working with you guys through the rest of this process, and I know there's a lot of work still to be done, so this is, obviously nothing's in concrete, but at the end of the day, I think we all want to do what's right for every citizen across town. So
It's not far off. would
I
say
probably
that.
came in a little lean.
It's not far off. It really, in my opinion. I mean, I don't think we're gonna be too crazy. I agree. I mean, my gut says we're not far off.
I don't have a number in my head, so I don't know.
I think we're okay. We'll work through this. I mean, obviously, the number's gonna go where it goes. Us two on our side, for Marcia, we wouldn't be able, without Marcia, we'd all be in trouble. So, I mean, let's be clear about the cornerstone of the town here on the number side. Yeah, thank you, Marcia. And from our side, I think that's it.
I just want to make a mention on one unsung hero, and that's Ginny in our office. She just is a workaholic, and I just wanted to mention her name because she is so helpful and helped Tara's transition a long way. So I just wanted to give a shout out to her.
All right, I think with that, the Board of Finance will adjourn.
Board of Selectmen will adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.